I think, the best place to start, as we, were talking briefly before, is the housing crisis. I don't think it's getting anywhere. I mean, again, it's getting some attention, but it's not getting wall-to-wall coverage attention the way that it needs to. And when
I just want to cut you off. This is not a housing crisis. This is economic terrorism. What's going on?
Oh yeah,
and
oh,
I think sometimes because of terms like gentrification, which a lot of people don't even know what that means, or the housing crisis, what's going on right now is literally, to me, economic terrorism. Sorry to cut you off.
Not at all. I mean, again, this is a topic, for those who don't know, Jordan and I are actually personal friends. This is an issue that is very near and dear to him, and it is not getting the type of attention that it really needs to be getting, because this is what is going to cause the literally the ground to break in this country, is when people are no longer able to put a roof over their head. And we have a crisis with that as it stands right now, but it's going to become an avalanche. There are tens of millions of people who are at a point where they're not going to be able to remain in a house or in an apartment. They're going to be kicked out. And I think that also is where organizations like BlackRock plays a role. But what did you learn in terms of the housing crisis, just going through Philadelphia, going through, I think if you were in Morgantown, I know you were in Louisville. I'm curious as to what has been the overall consensus in terms of the people that you've spoken to that are potentially facing eviction.
Yeah, I just want to highlight also, sometimes it's me who gets credit, but Jen, my partner, was with me. Yeah. John, our cameraman, so it wasn't just me. But, first let's start with, the federal government and the media, pushed the headlines. The CARES Act originally, then Biden, his COVID bill. But if you actually look deeper into those headlines, first off, there was tens of billions of dollars that were supposed to go towards rental relief during the pandemic. And that money was going to landlords who we think were supposed to be using it as payment for their tenants during a pandemic that killed over 600,000 people. What actually happened, we learned, was a significant portion of landlords and slumlords all across this country were essentially double dipping, taking the rent money, taking the rental assistance money from the federal government and evicting their tenants. And they were using the rental relief money to do improvements on the property, redevelop the property, or flip the property. So we met a lot of people, and we haven't even published all the interviews, who were illegally evicted. There was major loopholes in the eviction moratorium. It really only protected people who couldn't pay, but landlords, because of the loopholes, started evicting people for nuisance violations, started evicting people, your lawn's not mowed or you're not keeping the property upright, evicted people because they're not on contract when the lease was up, but the landlord wouldn't let them re-sign the lease. So essentially what this pandemic was, and Naomi Klein talks about this in Shock Doctrine, and essentially was a opportunity, what does Rahm Emanuel say? Never let an opportunity go to waste. Yep. Was an opportunity for real estate developers who, by the way, are in collusion with local and city governments. We actually learned in Philadelphia, there's real estate developers who are city council members and still are real estate developers.
No conflict of interest there.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, that are literally, basically the landlords have stolen the money from the federal government with no accountability, just like, the bailout in 2009 to the banks. No strings, no accountability, nothing, no eyes. Same thing here. They stole the money, evicted in a lot of cases. I mean, we haven't gone all across the country. Really poor, black people, brown people, white people. Jen actually went into a home in Louisville that literally had shit piping into it, sewage from other homes piping into it, all sorts of code violations, holes in the wall. This was an autistic trans man that lived there. And he was being evicted despite all of this. So what we learned on one end was the money has been stolen. Hundreds of billions of dollars, state to state, was given to landlords who essentially, not all, but a very large amount, pocketed it and then tossed people to the streets. One woman in Louisville we interviewed, really nice woman. She worked for the U.S. Census Bureau, was laid off because of the pandemic, eligible for unemployment, didn't get it. Her lease was up in December 2020. Her landlord wouldn't let her re-sign it. She ends up being evicted in March. The only reason she didn't actually be homeless is because Black Lives Matter Louisville got an Airbnb for people like her. There were more than her in that Airbnb. She would have been actually homeless without the support of Black Lives Matter. She just found a place 4 months after being evicted. We interviewed a construction worker in a park in Philadelphia. I've seen a lot of homelessness in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. I had never seen anything like this park in Philadelphia. It's called McPherson Square in Kensington, which is a really rundown, poor area. Just a sea of homeless people. We interviewed a construction worker laid off during the pandemic, sleeping in a park for over a year under a train. Basically said, if the city got money from the federal government, we didn't see any of it here. Fortunately, sometimes good things happen when you actually leave your studio. Our interview with him got a lot of praise and attention, and people, one viewer reached out to us and now is setting him up with a job. So something came from that. But between the landlords pocketing the money and evicting people, between the loopholes in this eviction law, I think even I was wrongly under the assumption that the apocalypse was coming when the moratorium's up. No. The apocalypse was already there. We just didn't know it.
Right. Also, I want to ask you something that I've been noticing is that we're talking about people that just don't have homes. There is this whole slew of people that are living in tents and renting out their homes or Airbnb-ing their homes or whatever they're doing. So because they can't even afford to live in the homes that they do have. And I think that is something that is not being calculated when we're talking about like homeless population. I cannot tell you the amount of people I've met on Airbnb that are crashing at someone's house or living in a tent because they can't afford and they need to be able to rent their own property. I mean, this is out of control.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, in Philly, Louisville, Cleveland, and West Virginia, we saw tent cities. So it's happening everywhere. And there are people, I remember in Portland, this was pre-pandemic, I covered a tent city. When I got there for interviews, it was empty because people were working.
Yeah.
So these are like working poor people. I'm literally trying to set up interviews now with people that work at Amazon full time that are sleeping in their cars in the parking lot. So this is beyond, it's beyond really a crisis. It is really the legalized auction of a country to BlackRock, real estate developers, Koch brothers, Democratic Party donors, Republican Party donors, nonprofits that are in on it. And as far as I know, it's not really getting any attention. And it's not that like Status Quo or I are so special. You don't have to go far. If you go out and just talk to people or go to different cities, not everyone, can do that, but you don't have to go far. It's just smacking you in the face.
Yeah. I actually drive around with a cooler in my car that I keep, non-perishables in, and I actually give out brown bags of food. One time I actually gave a bag of weed because I didn't have anything else, but he seemed very appreciative. But the fact is, I am prepared at any given moment that I'm going to see people that don't have food, that don't have access to food. And in Miami, what they've been doing, in addition to obviously trying to criminalize homelessness, is they actually bulldoze their little tent encampments. They go with the police, they go with the garbage trucks, and they just take all their stuff and just shove it in the garbage, and they just have to start all over again. This is something that's been happening pretty routinely in Dade County. I don't know how these places are standing, like in Philadelphia. How are they not getting washed away? Like, how are the municipalities even allowing this to exist?
The municipalities are one and the same with the real estate developers. That's why.
Right. But I mean, they don't want the homeless encampments. That's the thing. It's like, they don't want that there. They're creating it, but they don't want it there. So, I mean, like every time there's an encampment where we are, it eventually gets bulldozed.
Yeah, no, that's what they're doing. We covered one day in Kensington, which is a really poor part of Philadelphia that is being attempts to be gentrified. We covered, police were expected to do sweeps, which is kicking homeless people out of their corners or parks, evicting them. In many cases, the police seize their tents, their property. And there were protesters there against what the police were doing. But there were also protesters on the other side of the street who want the homeless gone. And those were the residents. And, you know, at first I was like, this is disgusting. Who could be out here attacking the homeless? But the more you talk to the residents, you understand they're also like one paycheck away or not getting a paycheck from being homeless. And there is, you know, a sea of needles in that neighborhood. There's poop all over the ground on their, they can't take their kids to parks, this and that. So it's not as black and white where like, you can understand why they're upset. But I was trying to get, when I interviewed some of the residents who wanted the homeless people out here, aren't you kind of focused on blaming the wrong group here? Why aren't you at City Hall? Because City Hall has more than enough money to beautify downtown Philadelphia. This isn't just Philly. I mean, this is every city. 10 blocks are beautified, you know, millions of dollars. I mean, all Rahm Emanuel did was push poor people out of Chicago, push black people out of Chicago, and make a beautiful river walk. That's basically all he did, other than cover up the murder of a 16-year-old. But I actually got some people to change their mind by saying, you know, why aren't you down at City Hall? Because City Hall and the government, by the way, who got hundreds of millions from the federal government, can easily build affordable housing, this and that. They don't want to. And the reason is, number one, I'm learning more and more. There's a lot of real estate developers either also are politicians that still have financial interests in real estate, or are basically just, there's a swinging revolving door in Louisville, I'm learning right now, that literally one of the worst slumlords in the country, their CFO left and is now working for the Louisville Metro government running evictions. So it's just this cesspool of corruption where, yeah, you would think it's in the government, federal, city, state, to, get the homeless off the street, give them housing. But really, most of these cities, what their real goal is to just widen as much as they can that 10-block radius that they've gentrified, and gentrify the whole city with high-rise condos, Whole Foods. I mean, Jesus, at the end of my honeymoon, we were in San Francisco. If you've ever been to Haight Street, which is one of the last bastions of the 60s, there's a friggin' Whole Foods on the corner. Yeah. I mean, it's so jarring. So, you know, what we saw was really these cities are essentially trying to disappear poor people, homeless people. And let's be clear, a lot of these people that are homeless, I guess I never realized this, but part of why I like going in the field is you learn stuff for yourself too, that you could then report. A lot of these homeless people, even if they had the opportunity to leave, a lot of them won't leave where they are because this is their family and they don't want to leave. They're like in this park I was in, they literally, they're each other's survival. They look out for each other, their family, because they're all each other has. So one person I talked to said, if I had an opportunity, I wouldn't go unless they get help too. So that's part of it. But overall, to say it simply, this is a housing crisis, but it's also a corruption crisis, because this is intentional. It's 100%
right. It isn't
intentional.
that there aren't enough houses. It would be a housing crisis if we didn't have enough houses. We have more than enough houses. There are so many empty houses. We keep building condos. We keep building stuff that nobody is going to be able to afford to live in. And then in here, they're also going to fall off into the ocean as well. So, but they keep building them. They just keep. And then there's homeless people. So it isn't, you're right. It's not a housing crisis. It's a morality crisis is what it is. I mean,
and by the way, you know, we heard a lot in the Democratic primary. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Nobody's talking about, you know, bombing Syria. How much does that cost? Nobody's talking about, you know, the tax breaks for Trump's donors and Democratic Party donors. Nobody's talking about, oh, yeah, we're getting out of Afghanistan, but we're technically still in Iraq and many other countries. All like actually getting the homeless off the street into affordable housing. And it's not just that. You need mental health services. You need drug rehabilitation services. If they did that, you'd actually help the economy on top of it's the right thing to do and helping your fellow man and woman. Because if you could actually support these people to becoming productive members of society, not that they're not humans, but get them into jobs, it only helps the economy and helps them. But this is a drop in the bucket compared to the bullshit money we spend everywhere else. Yeah. And it's just infuriating because honestly, one person comes to mind. I was interviewing a homeless man. I mean, this guy was an entrepreneur. A lot of people, you know, just stereotypes have this image of just like dirty, grimy drug addicts. But most of the homeless people I meet and speak with are smarter than any pundit I've ever seen on CNN.
Yeah, not okay. Low bar. But I would just, you know, I think, and I've met a lot of homeless people, there's always going to be an element of society that wants to sort of live on the fringe. There's always going to be, I call those people like, you know, your hobos. And there are those people. But what we're seeing is mass amounts of average people living on the streets. That's not normal. It's not something that's okay. And these are working people. These are people that work. I think it's like half of the homeless people actually work. I mean, you did something, I remember in Seattle where you were talking to people and it was like a huge percentage of them were full-time workers. And so this is not a lazy problem. I mean, this is a significant, you're right. It's just all filth.
Well, I also think real quick at the end of the day, I mean, it's just the old record spinning over and over again. So this is the same thing that happened in 08, 09, only to me worse. Yeah. I mean, it's literally the oligarchs blowing up the country and the economy. In this case, to me, Trump caused this. I've never had Trump derangement syndrome, but honestly, right. if an intelligent soul was in office at the time or a non-corrupt soul at the time, you simply would have shut down the country for 2 months, not each state doing its own thing. Executive order, whatever, you do what Europe did. You pay, the government backstops the payrolls. You keep everybody apart from each other, aside from essential services. And that's that. And you would have had, it wouldn't have evaporated COVID, but it would have made a significant difference. No, but nothing was shut down. Even New York City that was shut down, people were in Central Park, you know, people were taking subways. So they created this pandemic. Also Trump, I mean, it's kind of like on a bigger scale, what happened in Flint, he knew about COVID in January or February. He did nothing. He covered it up. So the government creates the issue. Part of why Trump didn't take aggressive action in the beginning is because the donors didn't want him to shut down the economy. And we know what happened. And now all the vultures, which are the banks, BlackRock, the remaining Koch brother who's buying up all these homes, nonprofits, I'm learning more and more, real estate developers, all these people behind public-private partnerships, which is just a code word for gentrification, they're pouncing like the hyenas in Lion King.
Yeah.
Speaking with Jordan Chariton of Status Quo, I think, again, I was going to leave it to the end to talk about, the corporate media and the impact that they have on this particular issue. But one of the topics we did cover in News and Amuse at the beginning of the show was the article in Vox that came out basically telling people, you had the one article we didn't even address, the one article saying that you should be content to be a renter for the rest of your life. But then there's the other one that says this is not Wall Street's fault. Like they're not to blame for this crisis. And I'm thinking,
who said this? Vox?
Vox.
Yeah. And again, this speaks to the greater issue of just how detrimental the Fourth Estate is to our society, because they're just mouthpieces for the people in charge. They will pay as they must to continue this charade of thinking, yeah, things are really bad, but it isn't what you think it is, even though that's exactly what you think it is. And I am curious, because I know you talk to a lot of people at the heads of corporate media outlets. Is anyone even attempting to make a push to try to cover this in any capacity without naming any names?
No.
I mean, I've been watching you for it seems years now, exposing really, really horrible, corrupt, filthy things. And the media doesn't really care. They're not interested. And I just think that we need to just accept it for what it is. They're all now no different than, like, let's say Entertainment Tonight or whatever that is. They're not news. They're not interested in news. They're not interested in investigating. They're just not interested.
It's actually worse than you think. It's not only that they're not interested. In some cases, we've had media outlets like stop our stories from coming out.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not surprised because they're not. Why do we even call them media? They're not. They're just propaganda stenographers. It's a very big difference.
Well, as you always like to, if there are certain people you like to lace into in corporate media, and Wolf Blitzer definitely catches a lot of your ire because he's
but Wolf's down in Florida doing the work. So
of course he is, and I think that. But you know, ironically, he really had the most important moment I've ever seen when it came
Pelosi.
With Pelosi. I think that moment when and the only reason he brought it up, I truly believe this, because as you know, Jen and I were in DC not too long ago to be on Tim Pool's show. And the one thing that I took away from just walking in the city was how many homeless encampments were everywhere. And they literally were everywhere. And I'm thinking that Blitzer, who lives in DC, probably just couldn't avoid seeing it every day and thinking, man, this really is a problem. Maybe I should talk about it with the person who could actually affect change, who could actually do something about it.
Maybe I should investigate this further.
Yeah. And her response is, do you know who you're talking to? We're going to get this guy off the air. Can I get somebody else to interview me who isn't going to ask me to actually govern properly? It's so incredible. But I think that interview, for anybody who's never seen it, and to Blitzer's credit, and you can rarely give it, he actually pushed back on her a little bit. He did. He tried to basically tell her, no, Congresswoman, you're actually wrong about this. This is a crisis. I'm not going to say it the way Jordan Chariton of Status Quo is going to say it and basically blow up your spot. But I'm trying to get you to recognize that there is a crisis coming in this country. And if we don't deal with this, it is going to be of epidemic proportions that you can't even begin to recognize. And as Jen likes to say, you will not be able to build your moats wide enough. And I think that's...
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.